Welcome back to the program. We are joined again by Michael von der Schulenburg, who is a German member of the EU Parliament, who also spent 34 years in the United Nations, living around the world for years in the different conflict zones. So, welcome back.
Thank you very much, sir. The biggest conflict zone is I'm now in the parliament, I tell you.
Well,
It's a very unpleasant place, I must say. For somebody who wants peace, it's a very unpleasant place.
well, it sounds like a joke, but really the conflict zone today is Europe itself. And well, this was something that the European project was supposed to ensure would never happen again. And again, there's a very attractive narrative around the European Union. That is, after World War II, the Europeans integrate in the coal and steel community. Then it just transitions into the European community as the predecessor of the EU to seek security with each other instead of against each other. And it also has this economic utility that as the Europeans can rebuild, avoid this very destructive industrial rivalry, instead use collective bargaining power for collective autonomy and um, development. But I don't really recognize this Europe anymore to some extent. I mean, this whole vision of being a peace project and an economic project able to deliver clear, objective, well, tangible goals. Instead, there seems to be more of this great power ambition, or I have a hard time putting my finger on it. But again, you are, with your decades in conflict zones and also an MEP there in the European Parliament, how do you see how the European project has changed and, to identify essentially how to get it back on track?
I mean, if you're now sitting in the parliament and follow here the discussions maybe closer than you do, you have a feeling it's a military alliance. We just got a proposal for the so-called defense readiness roadmap. There's no price to it, but it must have cost hundreds of billions of dollars, where we want to rearm. We do basically things which was responsible for NATO. We basically take NATO over into the European Union. And I think it had something to do with our elites, because what the elites now do is irrational. Europe is surrounded by two wars. The Ukraine war, it's our neighborhood. Then Israel's different wars, our neighborhood. And in both wars, we are losing. Our ally is losing, like in Israel. Now we are losing it, and we don't want to accept it. When you hear in the parliament, they think still we win these wars, and we just told the Russians they can't conquer these things. The tide has turned and things like this one. So it's a refusal of reality, which we experience here in the EU, and therefore also our policies are completely irrational. I have always asked myself, why do we do this? I mean, by having a conflict with Russia, we have very expensive energy now. We don't get oil. We don't get cheap natural resources. We have now a conflict with China too. Our economy is going down. France is bankrupt. UK probably too. Germany is losing its industrial base fast. I mean, there's hardly any chemical industry anymore left. We used to produce 6 million cars. I think last year it was only 4 million cars. I mean, this is all what made our economy. And so why do we behave like this? And I have only one explanation for it. It's an elite project. And we thought that we wanted to be the third big power in the world in a multipolar world. That the war in Ukraine gave us the chance to rub shoulders, to come together, to make the European Union into a sort of semi-state, or, the United States of Europe. When you watch Mrs. von der Leyen, when she walks around like a president of a state and not of an administration. I mean, the Commission is basically only an administration. So I think there's a whole these things that we want to be big, and we want to have a Europe that goes from the Atlantic to the Black Sea. We want to have a Europe that goes from the Mediterranean to the North Pole. And so we talk about that Ukraine and these countries have to be brought into the European Union without any conditions. It has to be very quickly. We remind the Serbs that they have to follow our policies, anti-Russian policies. We should fall in line. I mean, we had recently the so-called Prime Minister of Greenland. What is it? Greenland in English, no? Greenland. I mean, a country of 56,000 people. He's called the Prime Minister. He also spoke like a prime minister, and everybody stood up when he said, he wants to come to Europe and not to the United States, and things like this one. The same as we had the opposition leader now from Belarus in the parliament, and everybody jumped up when he said, Russia will never win this war, and we will become part of Europe, and we will push Russia back into Asia, and things like this one. So I think we have this project where we want to have Belarus, we want to have Ukraine in it. Of course, we have not given up quite on Georgia, and we want to have, of course, on the other side, Greenland in it. So I think that's we have a stream of this big project, but I think it will all collapse because it's not found on reality. That's the only reason I have. We have not to forget that the European Union, when the project of having a constitution failed, we had then this Lisbon Treaty. I've tried to read it. I can't read it. I mean, it's so complicated that nobody can read. It's not made for people. The Maastricht Treaty is not made for people. So we have now an elite sort of technocratic institution that feeds on itself. And unfortunately, the parliament is structured in such a way that they see it the same way. And they support everything which has something to do with armament, with rearming, with not talking to Russia and all the rest of it. So it's a very irrational policy, the whole thing.
It seems, a key problem, as you suggest, might be that they refuse to see the world as it is, rather how they want it to be, because a lot of what's happening now doesn't seem sustainable. All the policies are destroying the European economies. The political leaders not only having low approval ratings, but creating even a concern about the political legitimacy. And it's strange. It's hard to make sense why there's no course correction, given that we're going down this path. And as you suggested, this is a push now to, again, even after the disaster of Ukraine, to force it, because remember in 2013, the Ukrainians suggested a trilateral agreement, that they shouldn't have to choose between Russia and EU, that they should have a trilateral agreement. And we said no. And even after now, all this disaster, the objective seems to be, well, the Georgians have to be forced into this, even though they don't want to choose. They made it clear, we would like to join the EU, but we're not going to be a front line against the Russians. And the Moldovans, I mean, we're kind of destroying the reputation of democracy itself by
Absolutely
rigging.
I mean, this is cheated elections. I mean, on a massive scale, cheated elections. I mean, why we accept this? Why did interfere in the elections in Romania? Why we interfered in the elections in Georgia? I mean, we do now things of the regime change very unprofessionally, by the way, because the Europeans are not very professional on these things, just to try to have things in our way. And it will not work. It will not work. We will have a great problem in 1-2 years when it all comes to heat. We have no plan what to do when Ukraine loses the war. What are we going to do? We are telling everybody that we are still winning it. So, I mean, and then at the same time, we're losing jobs. We have our energy is 4 or 5 times as expensive as in China and America. I mean, we make these huge commitments. I mean, think about this commitment with the United States, $600 billion of investments we should make in the US. Who? I mean, who? We want to buy liquidated gas and oil from the United States for $750 billion. We want to buy chips for artificial intelligence of 40 billion. I mean, we signed all these things. We can never do this. We signed also that we increase our military spending to 5%. What countries could France do this today? No. And could Germany do it? I don't think we could do it either. We have plans which we cannot implement anymore. They're completely unrealistic. I mean, I'm saying to the Ukrainian, because I have a contact still with the Ukrainians, I said, Europe cheats you. I mean, anything we have promised you, we cannot deliver. We said we would strengthen your military in order to improve your negotiation position. The opposite is happening. No, we said we would bring NATO peacekeepers there. The coalition of the willing will not happen. We speak about Article 5 security guarantees. It will never happen. France will not give any security guarantees, risking Paris for Kharkiv or anything like this one. It will just not happen. These are for somebody who's been so often wars like me. I mean, that these things are not realistic things. Security is not a security guarantee. It is basically that you have a peace agreement or some green where nobody's maybe happy with it, but everybody sort of can continue rebuilding on this one. This is the only security you will have. What is your relation with your neighbor? And there's a lot of things we had once promised to give them in our resolutions, to give Ukraine 0.25% of all our GDP should be transferred every year to the Ukraine. Nothing happens. Nothing. Now, because we don't have any, we want to have the frozen assets of the Russians. And we have made a big splash in the parliament. Yeah, we approve that. We have to get this money, and Russia will pay it back when they have lost the war. I mean, we still think they're losing the war. It will not happen. All these things will not happen. And the Ukrainian have to realize, I mean, now we have this big story that there 2 helicopters sort of went into what is the place called? Pokrovsk.
Yeah.
And you think that the whole thing changes the thing. I mean, it is hilarious. And for somebody who knows a little bit about how these wars develop, things, I sit in the parliament, I just can't believe what I hear. I can't believe what I hear. You see, look at Israel. Israel will not win any of these wars. Israel's the big idea of greater Israel is for the time being shot down by Trump. There was this Gaza agreement. Where were the Europeans? We are not even guarantee powers. It's Turkey, but not the European Union. You have to understand what it means. It's our neighbor. It's just across the sea, and we don't play a role. Only Mr. Costas came there. Nobody saw him in television because he disappeared. He never said anything to this one. So we have this big thing, the European Union, with 450 million people being still relatively rich, and we don't play a role at all. And this is our policies. Mrs. Callas is not received anywhere anymore. Yeah, it is a suicide we're committing. We are committing suicide, economic and political suicide. Slow motion suicide. I have no other word for this.
Yeah, I have an American colleague who recently went to Kiev and meeting with people like the intelligence chief Budanov, as well as the former defense minister, and they can confirm what you're saying there now, that they feel also a bit cheated by the Europeans, because the Europeans are promising them heaven and earth as long as they just continue to fight, but then nothing actually materializes. And as you suggest, it can't materialize. We don't have the weapons, we don't have the political will, we don't have the economy to actually deliver on all these things. But you mentioned all this great power that the Europeans aren't invited anymore. Indeed, that's so in Egypt they were invited, but they were mocked as they stood there and tucked away in the back. But
I mean, how he treated the British. I mean,
yeah, no, it's
the
quite
British always thought
extraordinary.
that's their area. They still think they're in the colonial powers, and they think they are the big brother of the Americans, and because they are more intelligent than the Americans, that they run the show. I mean, nothing of the sort. Nothing of the sort. It's just we behave still like a post-colonial powers, and we don't realize that this time has been over for 50 years.
But Europe, for those studying the EU in the 90s and 2000s, the EU was conceptualized to some extent through these concentric circles. That is, in the center, you would have the core EU countries, and then you have the immediate neighborhood. And even on the outskirts of this, you would have big countries like Turkey and Russia, which would, for some reason, perpetually kind of orbit around the center of the EU. They would look towards the EU for the decision-making leadership, but they wouldn't actually have a seat at the table. And this was the gravitational pull which would keep the European project going. But now, of course, while the EU was dreamt of being this new great power of the new century, we see now, as you suggested, Turkey is invited. And when the Americans now speak of the great power politics of the future, they identify 3 poles of power: the US, Russia, and China. And some might see India there entering the future, but Europe's not even on the list. It's not on the map. So do you think this is part of the problem?
Absolutely.
Because we were supposed to
this is
be
the
key power.
obsession.
Now
I
it's
think
not.
when Trump was elected and the Europeans realized that they might be alone on the whole thing, they suddenly realized that they're losing to be the 3rd power in the world. It's going to be Russia. They had thought, when they we fight over control over Ukraine. I mean, it's something we did in the First World War, we did in the Second World War, and we do it again. And I think every time we lose it. And so every time it was in order to project power, to have this massive Russia with this huge land, a little bit under control. If we have take out Ukraine, we would weaken it. It's still the same policy, and it's not working. And I think this time, I think we will really suffer from it, because I think Europe will not recuperate from this very easily, because we have lost the industries and they will not come back. I can't see that. When you look at the comparison to BRICS countries, I mean, the EU it's much smaller. It's by people, by production, by technology. Technology is not anymore in Europe. Artificial intelligence, we don't have anything anymore. We used to build a lot of cars. The Chinese do it now much cheaper. We used to we build still an airplane. The Chinese will come on the market, and we will suffer on this whole thing. So I think we have no plans for the future. It is still this idea that we are great, and look at the sanctions. I mean, that we believe that India and China would change their policy because Mrs. Callas wants to have sanctions on them. I mean, it won't happen. It doesn't even happen with the United States. I mean, what is, all policy is the art of what is possible, and we have lost it completely. We pretend that, yeah, we had just Mrs. Callas in Kiev, and she said, "Oh, the war has now turned the tide. It's now Ukraine who's marching in ahead." I mean, what is he talking about? That's what he said. And we had a speech by von der Leyen about a week ago where she said, "No, sanctions now finally work. The Russian economy is about to collapse. We have just to do that, to introduce this 19th package and things like this." But I mean, there is a denial of reality on a degree which is suicidal. I mean, I can't explain it any other way. And if you say something in the parliament, you're screamed down, and you're being seen as being pro Russia or whatever. I'm not for anything. I'm just saying, as a European parliamentarian, just want to say that we are on the wrong track and that we hurt ourselves.
Yeah, well, first I thought it was simply an issue of, fake it till you make it. Just keep people believing that we're winning so they'll continue to commit resources. But I think it's more profound. I mean, Walter Lippmann, a century ago, he wrote that you don't really need that powerful censorship or propaganda instruments, because human beings, when they see information which conflicts with their core beliefs, they will close that newspaper themselves. They will change the channel. They will look the other way. And
Yeah.
if you recognize that the Europeans thought we were going to be the third power, and now you see that we're losing. I mean, the more evident it becomes that it is not going the way we thought.
Yeah.
The more the incentive is, I guess, to look the other way and ignore reality. And it's starting to look, more like we need to explain the situation more from psychology than actually from international security, because it doesn't make much sense anymore.
Yeah, but we have no politician in Europe who say something except Mr. Urban and maybe Fico, and maybe now the Czech a little bit. No, it is. I mean, the Spanish keep quiet, although probably they think differently. The Italians probably, in the meantime, think differently, but they keep quiet. So we all walk with it. There's nobody really putting up a warning. Now we have this very negative view about Trump. I have a different view about this. Not that I like him or anything like this one, you can imagine, but at least he is negotiating something. He does something. It seems to be irrational. But look at his relation to Russia. He hasn't done, since he is in power, he hasn't really done anything to harm Russia. I mean, these sanctions against the oil companies don't mean anything. But has he sent Tomahawk missiles? He has stopped providing them with armament. He says nasty thing about them from time to time, but in reality, he's waiting. And I could imagine that the moment the Donbass is falling, I mean, these cities, Pokrovsk and Konstantinovka or whatever they are called, are fallen, I think they will have a peace treaty. I'm sure the Americans and the Russians have continued to talk, despite all on the screen, all this funny other talk. There is an interesting interview by Vance and also by, what's his name, Dmitriev when he came to the US. He said, we are on a peace, we are much closer on a peace deal than you thought. Both of them said this. It can't be for nothing. I'm sure there's negotiations. I'm sure there's continue to talk. And there's also something other interesting. When Trump learned about the experiment of these new missiles called Borevsnik, I mean, I'm not speaking Russian. He said, what a pity, it comes on the wrong time. Of course, because it undermines him vis-a-vis his own neocons. No? I mean, Trump has this huge problem that he's surrounded by neocons. And that's why he uses Mr. Witkoff or his son-in-law to do these negotiations, because he doesn't trust the own administration. And by the way, I think Putin will have the same problem. He has a problem with hardliners. If they win in the Donbass, they will insist that they go to Odessa also, and the pressure comes from on both sides from hardliners in the present time. And we in Europe don't want to see it. We think these two people are the hardliners. I think they don't realize the hardliners are somewhere else.
No, I agree. And I think that this is the main problem, because at the moment the assumption is that, well, the Russians are putting this condition, they want all of Donetsk. But the assumption is if we wait until they have Donetsk, then it might be easier for our side to accept it. So the Ukrainians don't have to walk away from territory they're holding. But as you're correctly saying, at that point, the condition of the Ukrainian army will be very much weakened. The trust in NATO and will be diminished even further. So there will be a massive pressure among their hawks in Russia, that is, to march all the way to Odessa, to make sure that none of this NATO can never do this to them again. I mean, it's a disaster.
And it's their Russian city. I mean, this is it was a princess of a village princess who became Tsarina at the time, no? Katarina. No, it was founded by her. Also, what's the other town? All these towns down and the things. There's of course a lot of history in this one, and it comes awake again during the war and things like this one. Very unfortunately, I must say. I would say that to the Ukrainians, say you have to negotiate, because you don't have to wait until you collapse. Because when you collapse, and I've seen it in so many other countries, your political system will also collapse. You don't have to let it go to this point. But I think it looks now that it's going to this point. I don't know we will inherit a failed state.
Yeah, I asked the former
failing state, which I really regret, because I think we should all feel sorry what happens to the Ukrainians. They are the betrayed people. They are being used for great power politics, and it's their blood. Of course, they have their internal problems and all the contradictions also. But in the end, this was us who pushed them in the war, and they lose their sons and daughters and their future. And if they lose more, I mean, the country might not even survive as a functioning state, and that would be a great pity. And we should not let it go to it. And I think Europe has a great responsibility for blocking Trump on these peace negotiations. We are the spoiler. We have no power to do anything, but we are spoilers. And otherwise, I think they would have agreed in the very beginning when Trump says, you can have the Crimea and you can have all these territories. I don't think the Russians would fight for a few villages, more or less. But they didn't trust that Trump could implement it, because the Europeans still talked about becoming member of NATO for Ukraine and things like this one. So they spoiled it. We spoiled it. These Merz people and people like this one, I think they are really responsible for a lot of killings that happens now. Macron, Starmer, I think they have blood on their hands.
Well, I was in Minsk last week, and the foreign minister of Hungary was there as well, and he framed the problem now in Europe as a crisis of reason and common sense. And it was hard to disagree with it, because if there was a clear strategy, what we want to achieve, how we can achieve it, would be one thing. But as you say, spoiling the peace initiatives when there's no path to victory, it doesn't seem to make any sense. But I guess it touches, besides the the more deluded now self-image, it does touch on a different issue, though. Is what is it that creates peace? Because the European project after World War II, it was about cooperation. We always talk to each other. We again try to seek security with each other and stand up against each other. But now, when you hear the Europeans speaking about what creates peace, for the past 30 years, it seems incrementally it means peace happens when the enemy is defeated.
Absolutely.
And we also apply this to Russia, which is a very, well, for many reasons, an absurd proposition. But why?
Yeah.
How did we end up having
You know, I
peace
don't know.
through
You know,
victory?
Glenn, when I listen to this parliament, when they talk there, and unfortunately also the defense minister in the United States, there is this Roman saying, if you want to have peace, you have to prepare for war. It's of course a completely silly thing, because it would mean that every state would have to arm again in order to prevent that the other one. We have a very bad image of other people, that they are always enemies, no? That you have to have your pistol on the side because he might attack you or whatever. So the whole thing's about negotiations, about having trust on agreements you reach, is gone through. That's why we don't negotiate. So we have only to put more and more arms. And then the Europeans do the silly things. When you look at this roadmap I spoke before, this is hundreds of billions. This has no quite price ticket on it, but I think it's probably hundreds of billions. They want to have a defense wall against drones. At the same time, the Russians have these nuclear-powered rockets. I mean, what world do they live? I mean, do you think the Russians will agree to have a drone war with the Europeans? If they go to war, I mean, we will get the other things, and we won't be shooting it down with what we want to do against drones. I mean, this is so, it is childish also. I mean, even if you think that Russia is an enemy and things like this one, and Russia might be dangerous to you or whatever, I mean, even then, this whole policy is completely irrational. I mean, why not NATO doing this? Why is the European Union suddenly doing this? With no experience on it, actually with no mandate for it. If you look at the treaties, we don't have a mandate to have an army and things like this one. And we do this. I mean, it is not going to happen. It's not, all these things are not going to happen, and it will catch up with us.
So it's a bit of an opportunism, that is, never let a good crisis go to waste. In terms of centralizing, well, making the EU into a United States of Europe format, maybe.
But it won't be. The opposite will happen. We will fall apart because we can't afford it. Do you think really the other states will allow Ukraine to become a member now of the European Union? I mean, the first country will say no is Poland, probably. Look at they don't even allow agriculture products to be sold in Poland, no? No, it won't happen anymore. I mean, the Ukrainians have to be realistic. They won't be members of the European Union. And if this is done, then the European is basically a project will falter in itself. It will not happen. And the Belarus, we want to swallow up Belarus also? I mean, in what world do we live?
I would like to see some strategic priorities if EU, again, if the EU should be one among many great powers, and also it seeks unity. It seems like a good approach would be to return to the principle being an economic project, because if the EU could begin to establish its own digital ecosystem, become an economic power, then the Europeans would look towards cooperation for simply having technological and economic autonomy, that is a bit more independence from the US, China, Russia, even, just to have some economic sovereignty. But instead, we're going down the path of war, which means we become more dependent on the US for security, which means we have to subordinate our economies even more. I mean, it seems
destroy our
self-destructive
economies.
at its core, though.
We destroy our economies.
Yeah.
I mean, also Germans. Wait, it will have a lot of internal problems in the long term. They will vote parties we don't like. There will be a shift of power in Europe too. That will have we have also our internal conflicts because of this one. It's an unrealistic policy.
Well, I spoke to a former politician, and I asked, if with the gift of knowing what actually happened, would we do it all over again? I mean, if we recognize our mistakes, we can start to correct it. So, for example, in 2014, we know that most Ukrainians did not support the toppling of Yanukovych, and the consequence was they lost Crimea, they lost 4 more oblasts, hundreds of thousands of dead, infrastructure destroyed. And of course, Europe is fragmenting, and America's leaving Europe. Would we do it all again? If you could go back, and maybe that was not a great idea to topple Yanukovych to force Ukraine to choose between East or West. And it's like, yes, well, it was the right thing to do, which kind of begs the question, if you're stuck in these normative arguments in terms of how you wish the world would be rather than how it actually works, there doesn't seem to be much hope for course correction, though. How can we? I mean, if there's no recognition of our own mistakes.
For 34 years in the UN, and for me, the UN Charter is very, very important. When you work in war countries, you need the UN Charter. Otherwise, you lose your orientation. Now, the UN Charter doesn't play in Europe any role anymore, which is a great pity. But in reality, if you look at the Ukraine war, the Charter says that we will continue to have conflicts, but we should negotiate our conflicts in order not to have war. But we refuse to negotiate. And when the Russians and the Ukrainians came more or less to an agreement, which was a brilliant achievement by the Ukrainian diplomacy in Istanbul, we boycotted it. We shut it down because we wanted to have the war with Russia. We wanted to have Russia small. And I found a very interesting quote by Zelensky 2 days before they signed the agreement in Istanbul, because there was already the pressure on him not to go ahead. He gave an interview to The Economist in which he said something like, our Western friends would like the war to continue in order to I don't know what he said about it, to harm Russia. I just something like this one, even if it means the demise of Ukraine and the blood of Ukrainian people. So he said 2 days in 28 March 22, exactly what is happening today. So he knows, but he can't go out of it anymore. He can't go out of it. He has constantly these colors and these von der Leyens and the Merz and all go there and clap their shoulders as if he's a great hero. And so he can't. How can he sign a peace agreement with Russia under these conditions? He will be killed by his own people.
Yeah,
If we don't go with the Americans and saying, listen, you have to accept the reality now created by the war and make the best out of it. You have to negotiate with Russia on these terms. And that's in all the wars. If you can't change it militarily, if it comes to a war and you can't change it anymore militarily, you have to accept what the war has produced. It's just what it is. All the wars in the world. I don't know of any war that is not like this. And we refuse to do that. We refuse. We say you can still win the war. And we kill hundreds of thousands of people with this. Europe really has blood on its hands.
It is extraordinary, though, all the deals which have been, I guess, a sabotage, because it's worth remembering in 2014, the EU signed up as guarantors, or some European governments signed up as guarantors for this unity government, which was then toppled and nothing was done. The Europeans also signed under Minsk, and then later on suggested, well, was to buy time. It's very hard to understand why there would be such a consistent undermining of diplomatic peaceful outcomes, and instead encourage Ukraine to not make any deals. And the quote you come with, or paraphrasing from Zelensky, the interview to The Economist in March of 2022, it's quite extraordinary, because, as you said, he outlines it directly. Like, yes, some of our Western partners do want us to keep on fighting, even, just so they can weaken Russia, even if it means the destruction of Ukraine. I mean, this is from Zelensky, and is he also the Putinist now? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. It just is strange to me. If there was a battle plan, how we can somehow defeat Russia, despite being the world's largest nuclear power, and sees this as an existential threat. But even if it could be done, fine. Let's see the strategy. But we're losing this war. Even now, when the option is, should Ukraine lose the war faster or slower, losing more men, more territory, more infrastructure, we're still going for slower, even though it will also bring Europe down. Within the limits of reasons, it's very hard to see where the strategy is. But they don't present a strategy, I guess.
It's decided by people whose blood is not involved, whose sons and daughters are not in the war. I mean, it's immoral of an unbelievable proportion. And the interesting thing is, Glenn, that we have a media in Europe, and especially in Germany, which is very one-sided. I think they're, for this one, British have already a free media. I mean, who makes people believe that we are on the moral side. We are the moral good ones. We help to rectify some immoral things that happen in the world, and the self-righteousness we have. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. There is absolutely no criticism whatsoever.
But since you bring up Germany, though, the for Germany, Chancellor Helmut Schmidt, he made an argument back in 1978 that it was important that Germany should clothe itself in the two main institutions of Europe, that is, the European Community and NATO, to make sure that the rest of the continent will be comfortable with Germany's rising relative power. So again, this is not a secret that for Germany to grow, it would be important within the confines of the EU and NATO. But at the same time, Germany also played a very constructive role with the East in terms of reaching out, seeking less military confrontation, and instead more diplomacy and mutual understanding. Again, mitigating some of the worst tensions with the Ostpolitik. But after the Cold War, many hoped that there would be unity between West and Russia, much like there had been between France and Germany after the Second World War. But instead, I think the EU and NATO became institutions for constructing then a Europe without the Russians. And again, the two main institutions which Helmut Schmidt had seen as Germany closing itself in for a peaceful posture instead now seems to instigate or reviving this zero-sum Cold War bloc politics. But do you see? I mean, I think most Europeans should look a bit to Germany, because this was, the power center of Europe, the economy driving Europe forward. So, do German politicians speak anymore about how Germany can facilitate a more
Not at all.
inclusive Europe
Nothing,
without this
nothing,
bloc?
absolutely nothing. Mr. Merz says now Germany should have the largest army in Europe, meaning also larger than the Russian army. And by 2029, we will have a military spending, if it goes according to plan, which is much larger than that of Russia. I mean, how is our neighbor? How are the Czechs looking? The Poles looking at it? How the Dutch, even the French, looking at this one? That we will have now a Europe that militarized, in which the big power is Germany. I mean, does he really think this will be implemented? It will not work. It will split Europe. I mean, we had already twice the largest army, and it didn't go very well. So I think at this third time, it doesn't go well either. So I think in Germany, everybody in the past is now seeing that they are appeasement, that what we talking with Russia is appeasement, because Russia is, like the foreign minister once said, our foreign minister, that Russia is our internal enemy. Basically you can't even discuss with them because they're always enemies. I mean, this is what we have now. Germany was always as two sides, and this side has completely won out. And I think it will only change after we lose the war. Maybe then people come there. If we look at the Social Democrats, also in the parliament, even the left is extremely pro-war. I mean, I sit up there and I think, what, this is over there? This is the Social Democrats. I mean, when you hear this French Social Democrats, I mean, this is or socialists they call them. I mean, this part of the worst warmongers I have in the parliament. Some of this higher speech of rearmament came from the left. I mean, the Scandinavian left. The others are a little bit different, but this is what the majority is. When they all jump up because Belarus is going to become part of the European Union, the right and the left, everybody jumps up. Then I'm sitting there with 20 people in the background. We are the only ones that don't jump up because we think that's madness. And this is what the parliament does. At the same time, we are losing the war in Ukraine, and Israel is losing its wars on the other side of the Mediterranean, as if this doesn't happen. I don't understand it.
But it's this very, again, if the objective was simply to get along to have a peaceful Europe, if we take Belarus as a case study, it seems that there's already much better pathways, because even now with all the tensions going on, again, I was in Minsk last week. President Lukashenko was still making the point that why all these sanctions, why all this provocation? We can still we can work together. And indeed, the interest of Belarus, from the Belarusian government's perspective, is to diversify their trade. They do not want to put all their eggs in the Russian basket because
No,
they'll
of
become
course
too
not.
dependent. So they want to work more with Europe. When the Americans reach out to them now under Trump and said, let's try to improve the ties, they were excited about it. Indeed, some were a bit concerned that the government's a bit too excited because they might be cheated. Like Trump, he's quite deceitful when he dealt with the Iranians, for
I
example.
know.
But on the Belarusian side, they're very happy. They want to work with Europe. And it reminded me a bit about the Georgians, because they all say, well, we would love to be a part of the EU. We want to work more with the EU. Just don't, we're not going to be the second front line against the Russians.
I
We're not
know.
going to do this. And, and this is not enough. It's, why is this not enough? I mean, it's a nice position to be in, that, they have a union
That the
state with
European
Russia, but
Parliament
still.
invites the opposition leader who tells us that in elections he would win it, or he would have already won it if it wasn't cheated. He should really be the president of Belarus, and in this case, Belarus would be with the EU. I mean, how can you trust this? This is the real policy.
My last question, though, is about what do you see happening in Eastern Europe? Because if there's some countries that have historical reasons for carry grievances towards the Russians, I mean, there's a lot of countries in Eastern Europe who lived under the yoke of Moscow through the Cold War, but still, you see now the main opposition, I would call it a peace opposition, developing within the EU, seems to be Hungary, Slovakia, increasingly Czech Republic. I mean,
Also in Romania, don't forget
Romania.
elections. Yeah.
How do you explain this? I mean, I know
and
Poland,
Bulgaria,
the
don't
Baltic
forget
states are the
Bulgaria.
outlier, but still, how can we make sense?
I don't know, really. I don't know. It's just, I think it's interesting that Hungary really, with the uprising, had really a problem with the Russians. I mean, more than any other country. But I think that they are neighborhoods, and you have to get along with your neighbor, and they see there's a chance to get along with a neighbor, and not put all their eggs in what France. In France, I think I mean, the European Union used to be very attractive for other countries, but we're losing this attraction because we play a less political role. Our economies are going down. We might have a huge economic problem in France. That could trigger, some people say even could trigger that the euro collapse. I mean, I don't know these type of things, but it's not a small issue if France collapses economically. And so I think we are much less attractive. When you talk to the Chinese also, they think always, maybe we could come with Europe, we could get along. They probably even thought that they could have more relations with Europe than with the United States. I think it's all changing now. It's all changing. I think there's hope that Europe sort of would behave rationally. We have so unpolite when we had this 50th anniversary of the relation between EU and China, when they gave receptions. None of these MEPs except 3 appeared. And that was only people like us. All the others didn't come. I mean, they said China is not important for us. And Wadepool doesn't travel to China. He says he doesn't want to go there anymore. I mean, who is he? I mean, that's what it is in the moment. And I think it will change. It will change the moment the war is lost, because it will dawn on them that their policy is not going. Israel will have great problems for the future, and with all the wars which are our neighborhood, whether it's Gaza, West Bank, or Lebanon, or Syria. We're going now to Syria to support this the ex al-Nusra boss and things like this one. I think it's all not going to work out. It's not going to work out.
If foresee
And Iran. I mean, Iran won the war very clearly. And is Israel going to re-attack Iran? I don't think they can afford it without the United States. And I don't think, it was interesting when Trump I think it was a speech in the Knesset. In the end, he says, long lives America, of course. And then he says, long lives the Middle East, not Israel. I mean, there's something to it. We shouldn't forget that the public opinion in the United States is changing against Israel. Or at least becomes more critical about Israel. You know, when you hear Tucker Carlson things, when you even this Charlie Kirk, I didn't even know about them before. I mean, this is of course the people who were the staunch support of Israel. If they lose this one and they lose a lot of support in Europe, I mean, Israel will not be able to survive like this one. I mean, I'm not saying that the state will disappear, but their whole plan of expanding and being larger, I think I think really it's finished.
Do you think the European Union might cease to exist? Because, well, at the moment, if it's not the traditional peace project, it doesn't have the political gravitational pull, and it doesn't have the ability to deliver clear economic benefits to its member states. If unity becomes too dependent on fighting Russia and the war is lost, do you think the EU itself could dissolve?
Maybe not dissolve, but it will not survive as it is now. It will not survive. It cannot survive. Look at the public support. I mean, traditionally, only 40% of Europeans went to the elections for the European Parliament. Now it's 50. But it's only 50 because in the meantime, 20% of them are anti-EU or to a certain degree, European skeptics. That has increased, but it's still only 50%. And I think that when we see the popularity of Merz and Macron in the EU and things like this one, I think that the population will turn against us. We will have right-wing parties winning now the elections, or more and more. I mean, they are very scared. They don't think that the EU should continue like now. And so I think the EU will have a huge internal problem of surviving. No? And I mean, von der Leyen is extremely unpopular. Extremely unpopular. I mean, it's a completely undemocratic institution also. We are just having in next week, we have a session I organized in the European Union where we look at the sanctions against individuals. I mean, the European Council is lawmaker, is judge, and is executor. It's all in one. I mean, tradition in democracy, you have to separate these powers. But the European Union thinks it's all in one. The Commission, they decide all the three. And they make the very harsh sanctions on individuals, including on journalists. And so we will have a public discussion. There will also hopefully a lot of journalists coming on this one, because I think it's for me, it's also, I mean, I'm a very conservative person. I think we have to defend the rule of law. I mean, if with this war, the rule of law goes through the window, which it does to a certain degree, if democracy goes through the window, like the elections in Moldova, I think we are winning. We are not only losing the war, we are losing our own identity as a democratic Europe. And I think they're very close to it.
That's a curse, though. If you're too convinced in your own virtue that you are the good fighting the evil, then the separation of power, something that prevents you from acting,
Yeah.
to do good, it becomes a bad thing. Upholding election laws, or for example, for Moldova, if the outcome means that they're falling away from the EU and joining the bad countries, then democracy also becomes problematic. So this assumption of virtue, I think, is
also our treaties. Look at the UN Charter. I'm sorry for coming back on this one because it's so important for me. I mean, the UN Charter was a present of the Americans to the world. Without Roosevelt, we wouldn't have a UN Charter. No, the whole idea that you don't have to repeat Versailles Treaty, that you have a different thing, that we work all together and things like this one. It is very supported outside. When I talk to the Africans, if I talk to the Indians or the Chinese, they're all for the UN Charter. But this 10% of NATO countries think suddenly they can do it without it. It's still this idea of a unipolar world. We make the rules-based order, and things like this. When our rules, it's not anymore the case, and it is definitely over. And it's also accelerated by these two wars we are losing. Not only because of war, but it's accelerating.
Well, I assume you have a big day at the European Parliament, so I'll.
If I survive it, I tell you, I find more. I'd rather be in countries with wars. I tell you, Glenn, the biggest war I've seen is, of course, the Iran-Iraq war. To talk to the Iranians, because we made this link all the time, you could talk to them calmly. What I see here, that you can't talk about it. I have this language I've never seen in Iran. I mean, and they were attacked by by Iraq at the time, even with chemical weapons and things like this one. I mean, you could rationally talk to them. And of course they had different interests and things like this one. But this sort of closeness to scream at everybody who says something else and makes another suggestion is, I have never seen this anywhere else. And we think we are the pinnacle of civilization. I don't see this in the parliament.
No, it's an extraordinary new situation. So, well, thank you again for taking.
Yeah, thank you very much, Glenn.
And
Yeah,
I wish
thanks,
there was more
Yeah.
optimism there, but
Okay, see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
It all goes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.